Brothers, I think that's a great way to kick off this evening. 2020 State of America, the post-election results. As you can see before you, we have an action-packed, filled panel members of powerhouses, and I'm just so proud to call them all my brothers. You've heard from the General President earlier, and Brother General President is going to come in and wrap up the conversation as we get closer. As the General President mentioned, we have a surprise guest. In fact, we have two surprise guests that will pop in at any time during our webinar, and that's Brother Raphael Warnock, who's going to be the next senator from the state of Georgia. And we also have Brother Dr. Cameron Webb, MD, JD, who will also be making a guest appearance, my brother. He ran in Virginia. So without further ado, I want to make history again, my brothers. We made history by bringing out a record number of Black men. Don't believe those polls, as they say. We actually showed up. Every Black man I know showed up to the polls, and every Black man you know showed up to the polls. And that's one of the main reasons why we were able to make that shift. Without further ado, brothers, let's get this conversation started. I want to take this point of personal privilege to introduce our moderator for this evening, Brother Dr. Smikle, who's a professor at Columbia, also the Rutgers School of Public Affairs, and he's a political commentator. You can see him all over the television screen if you have a remote. And so, Brother Dr. Smikle, enjoy the conversation. We're glad to have you, my brother. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, my brother, Brother Paul, and to Brother General President and past General President Harry Johnson. Thank you so much for the opportunity and your continued leadership. You know, this was quite an election year in the midst of dual pandemics. We had a pandemic of COVID-19 where currently over 9 million cases reported in this country, over 237,000 deaths. And then there was the other pandemic, the scourge, the 400-year plus scourge of racism and discrimination in our country. 4 years after the first Black president served his second of 2 terms, and now with a presidential election that features a Black woman, and AKA of Indian and Jamaican ancestry and point of privilege. I'm a child of Jamaican immigrants myself, so big up to JA. But between these historic firsts, we had a president in Donald Trump who engendered animosity, anger, and many would say instigated those things, and perhaps polarized an electorate more so than we've seen in American history. Here's an interesting statistic. According to the Brookings Institute, President-elect Joe Biden's victory in 477 counties encompassed 70% of America's economic output. Let me say that again. Joe Biden's victory in 477 US counties encompassed 70% of America's economic output, whereas President Trump's base of 2,497 counties represents less than 1/3 of the US economy. In 2016, Hillary Clinton, in terms of the counties that she won and represented, that number was down to 64%. So let's think about this economic divide. In both elections, Republicans won more counties, but Democrats won more votes. Joe Biden got 75, roughly, as of now, 75.6 million votes, which is certainly up from what Hillary Clinton received, about 10 million more than Hillary Clinton received in 2016. But Donald Trump received 63 million votes in 2016. And as of now, he has 71.2 million votes. So he has gone up as well, about 8 million votes. So how does our brotherhood collectively and individually make sense of this moment in time? And how do we stay engaged economically, socially, and intellectually in the months ahead, particularly as we are hearing themes related to this urban-rural divide, anti-intellectualism, and again, how we manage our education system in particular through this pandemic. So let's just get right to it. As was mentioned before, we are in the House of Alpha, so we want to make sure that we have a robust and impactful conversation tonight. You can put your questions in the chat. I will make sure to get to as many as I possibly can. And I want to talk now about the folks who are joining us today to share their wisdom and experience. Let's get right to it. Brother Mayor Wayne Messam, he's the mayor of Miramar, Florida. And you've been mayor since 2015, if I'm right in that.
That's correct.
He's a businessman, a former wide receiver at Florida State, and was on the '93 championship team. Is that right?
Who knows?
All right.
Right.
Thank you for joining us tonight, brother. Next, I want to introduce Brother Al Elvin. He's a school board trustee-elect in Oak Park and president of Gamma Lambda chapter in Detroit. Brother, it is good to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. I want to
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
You got it. I want to go to Brother Dr. John Bullock. Brother Bullock, we've been on panels before, have we not? Professor at Towson University with expertise in government, state and local politics, community development, and public policy. It is good to see you again, brother. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with your brothers.
And I didn't want to have this conversation without my brother, Eugene Scott. I've seen this brother many times. We've crossed paths in many green rooms at networks talking about politics, and I enjoy his writing. Brother Eugene Scott is a political reporter for the Washington Post and host of The Next 4 Years, a new Washington Post podcast exploring the outcome of the 2020 election. I definitely want you to talk more about your podcast, but brother, I thought it would be fitting to start with you because you've been writing about this race, you've been writing about our politics over the last couple of years. What were your biggest takeaways from this election cycle, election night, and everything that we've seen since then?
Thanks so much for having me. So good to be with the brothers to talk about so many of the things that we've been talking about since 1906 among ourselves and plan to be talking about moving forward. As was shared, I am a political reporter for the Washington Post. I cover identity politics in the Trump administration, soon to be identity politics in the Biden administration. And I have covered this campaign, the 2020 campaign, as I have covered the 2016 campaign. And one of the biggest takeaways from this moment may seem obvious to many of you, but it's worth citing. We are an incredibly divided country in terms of how we view the issues that are shaping and affecting us most. I was personally surprised by, I think, just how close the election was. I think many of us, based on polling that was not as out of balance as some people may think, just expected President Trump to receive less than 71 million votes. But the reality is that there are millions, tens of millions of people in this country who look at his vision for America and affirm it and want to see more of it, or at the very least did not support that of Joe Biden's. And so what is very clear is that regardless of what will happen in terms of the inauguration and President-elect Joe Biden moving forward, is that he has a huge challenge before him in terms of working with a Senate and a Congress that is less democratic, far so, than he was expecting. And how that will determine the Democratic Party's ability to shape policy, especially many of the ideas that the base had been championing, things such as, defunding the police and Medicare for all, and other topics that are very popular with the progressive left. It'll be very difficult moving forward with that, and it'll be worth paying attention to and keeping eyes on how. In fact, the Democratic Party, this Democratic administration will be able to do that. I think one of the things, lastly, that I will say that will be of significant importance to this particular body is that, as you may have seen, the Democrats did not win as many House seats as they thought they were going to. In fact, lost some, and certainly didn't have the success in the Senate that they hoped. We know that there are 2 races still outstanding, but that has led some leaders of the Democratic Party, and as well as some of those who perhaps were not as successful, to conclude that many of the base concerns are not winnable concerns, and perhaps the party should step back from them. The challenge with that is some of those base concerns are some of the concerns that were most pertinent to Black voters. And we know that it's Black voters, Black women and Black men, that helped Joe Biden secure victory. And so what this organization and others like us will have to do is it's pressure, quite frankly, the administration to honor the commitments and interests of the voting bloc that supported them most.
Brother Scott, thank you for framing it exactly that way, because I want to pivot from what you said and ask Brother Mayor Wayne Messam a question, because you're in Florida. There were a lot of questions about what was going to happen in Florida, the African-American vote, the Latino vote in particular. And as Brother Scott talked about, there's this sort of fight between, or perhaps a coming fight between progressives and more moderates of the party. There are questions about defund police and how much that may have impacted some of these House races. I know just here in New York, Mayor Max Rose was a member of Congress that came in, Democratic member of Congress that came in 2018. He was just ousted by his Republican challenger, who ran commercials against him because he marched in the Black Lives Matter rallies. So I guess the question for you in Florida, is what were you seeing and hearing from your constituents, and then in Florida politics generally about both things like defunding the police and even some of the broader questions about criminal justice reform, and a lot of progressives / Democrats being called socialists. Like, how does all of that how are voters thinking about that in Florida?
Well, a very excellent question. As all the brothers may know, Florida is a very complex state, a very large state geographically, as well as our population. And basically, when you think about the Panhandle and the North Central region, which is very red, except for the blue aces of Tallahassee and some aspects of perhaps Jacksonville, then you have the I-4 corridor. And then you have South Florida, which is much more liberal, much more progressive and diverse, and the gateway to Latin America. And I think in terms of this race, what was the challenge is, since 2008, when President Obama won his election, Florida has pretty much been a 1% state. So depending on whether the Democrats won or the Republican won, whether at the presidential level or at the gubernatorial level, elections were decided by less than 1%. That's less than 100,000 votes in the state of Florida. So it's a very split state. And we still consider it that. So it was very shocking to see that when Trump won by 3%, in most states, that's really not a large margin, but in Florida, that is very significant. And one of the things that contributed to that was during a very contested and busy Democratic nomination process, and I happened to be a part of that process as one of the recognized candidates. It was about 22 of us that were initially running. The Republican Party and Trump were just bombarding, especially in the South Florida market, labeling whoever comes out of the Democratic field as socialist. They would put out the AOC pictures and the Green New Deal, and then Venezuela had all of their issues that was bubbling in South Florida because they have a very large diaspora here in South Florida. So when you mix in all of the time and all of that lead time the Republicans had while the Democrats were determining who their nominee would be, Republicans were casting all Democrats as far left liberals and socialists, and we would change your life from where you know it today. And that really turned out the Cuban vote in Miami-Dade County, even though Biden won Miami-Dade County, but the plus and the surplus votes that he got compared to 2016 was just significant. He won by 300,000 votes in the state of Florida, and it didn't just come from Miami-Dade County. So it's very complex state. It just shows that 2016, when Trump won, was not a mistake. It was not a fluke. It's a real life. It's a real life feeling in this country, and a section of our nation that resonate with those views. And I'll close with this. In terms of Joe Biden's election and apparent victory, and we still have to wait for some time once all these legal challenges are done with, Joe Biden owes his election to Black people. His candidacy was resurrected and recharged when Congressman Clyburn out of South Carolina nominated him, and he won in South Carolina. And then it took off from there. He was smart by selecting Kamala Harris as his running mate. It definitely energized brothers and sisters across the country, and energized women, and energized the Caribbean community. And it really helped him be able to solidify the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. I know, brothers, we've always been at the anchor of this party, but our sisters really are loyal and true, and it really was able to help get him over the top. So, but Florida, as they always say, Florida, Florida, Florida. It stops and starts in Florida.
Now, brother, I'm going to come back to you in a second, but I wanted to get to, well, let me ask you if you could just very quickly, and I know that I was listening to, I think is your state of the city address, and I think you talked about 1,600 high-paying jobs, 7 million additional square feet of retail space, all this senior housing that you created. What I also think about is that Florida just supported, I think by 61 or 64%, an increase of the minimum wage to $15. And then a couple of years ago, the restoration of rights to the formerly incarcerated. So I guess what's interesting to me is that these are things that progressives were talking about, yet that is used as a wedge in these elections, but the voters seem to want that.
Yes. Yeah, Florida, and you have to also remember Amendment 4 that gave the voter restoration rights for ex-felons to be able to vote, although the legislature has found ways to put roadblocks in there. So Florida is just a very interesting state in terms of large amendment ballot issues that change our constitutions to help the greater good. They seem to pass, and that's why there's always hope. So when you look at a race like 2020, I think it will be like no other. It was definitely an anomaly, but it just goes to show the state of Florida is a very split state, and it could go anywhere.
Thank you, brother. Brother Elvin, I wanna ask you now, because we've talked through during this cycle, about young people. You're a trustee elect of a school board, right? So obviously you're engaged with a lot of young people. One of the things that has come out of these last 4 years, and certainly through this election cycle, is number one, how are young people faring during this pandemic? But also, how do we connect politics and governance to them at a time when a lot of leaders, and perhaps a lot of us, would look at the president and think about his behavior as maybe some form of toxic masculinity, if you will. Young people have trauma as well, and they don't have the voice necessarily to speak up about what they're experiencing. So given all of what's happened in the last 4 years, but certainly in the last year, talk to us a little bit about what's happening with young people where you are, and how we can, are they engaged? Do they want to engage in politics and public service? And how do we talk to them about it in this environment?
So that's funny you mentioned that. I just got off, before I got on this call, I just got off another call in which we are looking at engaging some of our youth in politics, and because they've identified themselves as people who might want to go into this. So we've identified them and brought them in, and I'll be on a call tomorrow evening in which we'll be working with them and kind of mentoring and getting ready to do some shadowing and things of that nature to keep them engaged in the democratic process. It's a monthly meeting, so they're continuously talking. But you mentioned kids, which is funny. I'll take you back to 2016. I have a 13-year-old now who was 9 when Donald Trump was elected in 16. And the funny thing about it is I always take him to the booth with me when I vote. This time we voted absentee, and he put the ballot in the box. But we take him to the booth with us. And when we were done voting, he said, well, I hope, Trump doesn't win. And sure enough, he did win. And the next morning, my son is like, can we move to Canada? You have to understand that Detroit, particularly this part of Michigan, Southeast Michigan, is the only area where you have to go south to get into Canada. And so my son is like, let's go south, let's go move to Canada. I don't want to live here anymore. Well, fast forward, 4 years, he's seen all the things that's happened, and he's come home and talked to me about, how kids feel, and they feel as if our president of the United States feels as if they're inferior, and that he is a racist, and then he's looked down on our young Black brothers and sisters. So I would imagine, though they are not in the classroom right now physically, many of them probably feel as if they're breathing a sigh of relief that perhaps America might have gotten it right, even though there are still so many questions to be answered from a legal standpoint as it relates to what's going on with the presidential race. I would say this too, in terms of challenges during COVID. Teaching and learning has obviously been an issue here in Detroit area, and especially the little ones. So if you think about it as parents, if your kids are going to school virtually, and I don't know, some parts of the country they're not virtual, but up here many of the kids are virtual. If they're kindergarten, first grade, how are you going to you can barely get them to sit down at all for a full day lesson when the teacher's standing in front of them. So you still have to do the same, but putting them in front of a screen, and then mom and dad, if they're at home, have to be the ones to kind of say, okay, 1 + 1, here's how that's 2, as well as still do their jobs during the day. So it is rough, and that means some of our children could fall behind, unfortunately. And a year behind for any child is certainly too much. We don't want to see that happen anywhere. On the flip side, for some of our older students, particularly those who are getting ready to graduate, since you mentioned how COVID affected them, as you probably well know, many of the colleges aren't paying as close attention to the college entry exams, which some of our kids may do great in the classroom, but not the greatest test takers, or mommy and dad don't have enough money to pay for Kaplan or whatever the case may be. So that does help them in some regard for those who aren't the greatest test takers. But obviously, COVID has been bad all the way around as it relates to academic achievement. And so we have to do what we can to help our children excel even amidst this environment, which includes the use of Chromebooks and office hours, like fourth and fifth grade teachers are now holding office hours like they're college professors. And so again, that's yet another thing. And I know we talked a little bit about the election. I just want to hit one thing about our area of Detroit. In 2016, there were about 5 million votes. And so now, the expectation here in 2020 was 5 million. This time we hit 5.5 million, which means we went 900,000 more in Michigan than we did in 2016. And certainly our laws here, played a part in that. And I think that helped. So because I was getting texts from all around the country, like Detroit better do its thing. And so, that was, I think the laws around here did help with that, loosening restrictions on what it takes to get a ballot count.
Thank you, Brother Elvin. So, Brother Bullock, just to pick up on that point, I kind of want you to anchor this part of the discussion for us. What happened? What happened? What was so unique about this election? Because we had people crying in the streets. We had this, so many folks come out on election night and afterwards, rallying in the streets, celebrating. It was almost like Barack had been elected again, because I remember a similar sort of outpouring of support and energy from 2008. But we didn't talk about voter suppression yet, but I would love for you to talk about, we might have been experiencing voter suppression. Oh, I see Brother Warnock right there. So if you can hold on that, brother, I'll give the floor to our General President.
My brothers, it is an honor to welcome our distinguished brother Dr. Raphael Warnock, who we are determined to make the next United States Senator from the great state of Georgia. Our beloved Alpha brother. We don't have to tell you that he's qualified beyond measure. He's committed to serving the people of Georgia, but more importantly, serving the people of the nation. So brothers, it is my honor as your General President to welcome to this house the next United States Senator from the great state of Georgia, our own brother, beloved Brother Raphael Warnock. Brother, the house is yours. The house is yours, my brother.
Well, thank you so very much. It's wonderful to be here. Mr. President, Dr. Ward, I'm grateful for the ways in which the men of Alpha have inspired me all of my life, and for the encouragement that I've received on this journey. I want to thank Theron Johnson, who reached out to me and to see if I could come by this meeting tonight. And I'm grateful to all the brothers who are out there. 06. And thank you so very much. I am on a faith journey, and my whole life has been about service. I'm not running for the Senate because I'm bored. I enjoy being the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. But that work over the last 15 years has kept me in what John Lewis, who only made one mistake in life, he didn't pledge Alpha, but it's kept me in what he called good trouble. And I came to Ebenezer right after Hurricane Katrina. The first thing I got busy doing was getting Katrina citizens who were living in Atlanta but couldn't vote in New Orleans because they needed to get back, and the state required them to go back physically. We created something called the Freedom Caravan. I'd only been there a couple of months. We raised the money and took bus loads of Freedom Katrina evacuees back to New Orleans so that they could exercise their vote. What inspired that? Alpha, a voteless people is a hopeless people. Y'all remember that?
Yeah.
And it was about giving people a voice. And ever since then, every year at Ebenezer, I found myself getting into some good trouble, standing up for access to affordable health care. When the state of Georgia refused to expand Medicaid in the state, I went to the governor's office, staged a sit-in with other activists carrying a quote from our brother Martin, that said, of all the injustices, Dr. King said, inequality in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And so they came, the police, the Capitol Police did what they're supposed to do. You know, when you engage in civil disobedience, you carry the consequences, and they came and escorted us to jail. And that was fine by me because I came to dramatize the fact that we had hundreds of thousands of people in the Medicaid gap here in Georgia. And then in 2017, when they were passing a $2 trillion tax giveaway to the richest of the rich in this country, and while taking money from the poorest of the poor, I went to the United States Capitol and staged a sit-in in the rotunda of the Capitol. I couldn't speak on the floor of the Senate because I had not been elected a U.S. Senator yet. And so I made my argument there, saying that a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. Show me your budget and I'll show you your values. Your budget, a nation's budget tells me who you think matters and who doesn't, who's dispensable. And if this budget were an EKG, it would suggest America has a heart problem. And we've come to the Capitol to perform moral surgery. The Capitol Police heard my speech and they were okay. And we stayed a little bit too long. They gave us 3 warnings. They said, you got three times that we're going to have to arrest you again. All right, we'll have to arrest you. And what they didn't understand is I had already been arrested by this idea that Alpha has always embraced service to mankind. This idea that if my brother or sister doesn't have healthcare, I don't have healthcare. And so they arrested me one more time that day. It's the occupational hazard of an activist. I'm running for the U.S. Senate to give the Capitol Police one more time to escort me. This time, not the Capitol, not to central booking, but to my office as the next United States Senator from the state of Georgia, where I can take the values of our beloved fraternity into the U.S. Senate to fight for healthcare, to fight for a living wage, to stand up for the dignity of work, and to stand up for voting rights. The Voting Rights Bill, which the Supreme Court destroyed in 2013, asked Congress to fix it. It passed the House last year. It has not even been voted on in the Senate because Mitch McConnell won't put it up for a vote. Mitch McConnell, who stood a few feet away from John Lewis's coffin and said what a great man of integrity he was as he lay in state, refuses to put it up for a vote. And so Alpha is well positioned to make history one more time by sending the first Black United States Senator from the state of Georgia and only the 11th Black senator in the history of the country to the Senate as we try to flip 2 seats in Georgia. John Ossoff, young Jewish man, running with me. We're running together to flip these 2 Senate seats and make history, but more importantly, make a difference. So thank you all so much for letting me drop by. And if you want to connect with my campaign, you can go to warnock4georgia.com. Everything spelled out, Warnock, F-O-R, Georgia spelled out.com. You can volunteer and you can give money. You can do both of those things, whether you live in Georgia or not. You can volunteer without coming to Georgia because we need folks calling and texting into Georgia, reminding people to vote.
Brother Warnock.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Brother Warnock, I want to say to you on behalf of Alpha Brothers Worldwide, we are with you. We're going to be there not only to contribute, but we're going to be there to help you with your ground game. And you can count on this fraternity, your brothers on your left and your right. We will be with you. We are determined to help you get elected, and you will see the Alpha Brothers always. They're going to come from all over the country, and we're going to work with your campaign to help coordinate a designated time that we are going to be out asking Alphas to come to Georgia. But before we do that, we're going to raise that good Alpha money and have brothers send some money, because we know, we've been in this business a long time. And brother, I want to tell you this from your brothers. We know that you're going to be under attack, but we want you to always remember, my head is bloody, but unbowed. And that we are with you, my brother. And as they come to attack, always know your brothers will take the blows, but you just keep on keeping on, my brother.
Yes, sir.
Our people need you. The state of Georgia needs you, but more importantly, this nation needs you in the United States Senate. So go, my brother, and know that we are with you. We're going to help you with your ground game. We're going to raise money, and we're going to let the world know that there is, and there goes an Alpha man. And he's got thousands and thousands of Alphas all over the world that's going to help him cross the finish line.
Thank you so much, brothers. The president does what he says. He's already been on the ground here in Georgia campaigning with me. So thank you, Dr. Ward. I love all of you, brothers. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. God bless, my brother.
All right.
We'll be back. I'm packing now.
06.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother President. And that was wonderful. And Brother Bullock, I just want to turn to you. And, you heard Brother Warnock, and, in finishing up my question to you, we've seen some extraordinary things in this race so far, and to its conclusion, and certainly subsequent to that, with all of what was being discussed about voter intimidation, voter suppression. You saw the outpouring of just excitement and joy in the streets after this election. Just kind of talk to us about this moment in time. Why was this special? What caused us to have this this I don't know, why this was such an outpouring of emotion?
Well, look, this is a very special moment in time. And when I saw Brother Warnock come on, it was really the perfect time in this conversation. So let me talk about this moment in time. One of the things I found interesting, when you're watching sports, and I saw those WNBA players with Vote Warnock on their shirts, right? They came out on the court. And so you look at what's going on in terms of social media, in terms of sports, and those voices being lifted. But also, I look at that support, and I look at it very personally. I know there was discussion earlier about cities like Detroit, and we can talk about Atlanta, and I'm originally from Philadelphia, and I look at those cities with those major metropolitan areas that had significant Black vote that turned out. And so you saw this repudiation of the politics. Again, even if you look at the vote totals across the country, it's closer than we might have wanted it to be. but it is very clear that Black people did deliver this victory. You look at some of these states that were potential swing states and states that got flipped. So you think about Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, you think about all those electoral college votes, Detroit and Michigan, electoral college votes, Milwaukee and Wisconsin. Again, these are significant movements. And so now you see folks who are looking to reap the harvest. At the same time, we must also keep folks accountable, to the interests of Black America in terms of how folks showed out. Here's the other part to think about too. And I say this from a political scientist point of view, but also as an elected official. We looked at our most recent campaigns as it relates to mail-in ballots. And so think about what was being projected at the national level, trying to sow distrust and misinformation around mail-in voting, even though the current occupant of the White House has voted like this for quite some time. But what we saw locally and nationally is that actually turnout increased. And so it should also be a message in terms of how do we give people access to the ballot, access to the franchise, and seeing those numbers actually tick up. And also, let's not make a mistake thinking about all the recent changes that were proposed as far as the U.S. Postal Service. And so that is very intentional. And so what you saw were people beating back that intentional misinformation and misdirection. One other point that was made earlier on in this conversation was around the 477 counties and the 70% of the economic output. It really harkens back to an interview where our brother Dr. King was quoted in 1963, talking about how states like New York and Connecticut subsidized effectively states like Alabama and Mississippi. And so therefore, in order to put pressure on the administration for civil rights and voting rights, there might need to be this conversation and this movement around the economics of our country. So all of that really frames the moment that we're in, not only the feelings and the real damage being done to progressive issues and causes throughout this country, not to mention the health pandemic that we're all dealing with. So all of that really created a perfect storm, for turnout, and especially even among young people. And I say this, I look at some of my students. The fact is, we look at those Gen Z voters, those millennial candidates. That's where this country is going. And so we can activate those people, those young people, to turn out and vote. They can really sway elections, and that's really what you saw.
Now, brother, I want to jump from that because we're talking about swaying elections. Brother Scott, I want to come to you. I don't think you wrote about this specifically, but you're in media, and I wanted to ask you, because I want to be real for a second. As we think about turnout, as we think about economics, and we think about our brothers, what should we make of rap artists endorsing Donald Trump? And we have brothers who are Republicans as well. We have brothers that worked in the White House. Did we make too much of that moment? Should we, is there something to be said about a multi-pronged strategy, in terms of not being beholden to one party? I don't know if you could speak to that aspect of it, but if you can at least, talk us through, some of the conversations around these artists endorsing Donald Trump and whether or not that's unprecedented. I don't think it is, but what do you think?
Yeah, it is not unprecedented to have Black male celebrities endorse Republican candidates. We saw this with Sammy Davis Jr. And Richard Nixon. We saw this even with Jackie Robinson. We saw this with Jesse Owens. And we do have data, there's polling by Pitch Strategies that's operated by a Black gentleman, Terrence Woodbury, that shows through focus groups and other research methods over the past 4 years that there's a significant percentage of the Black male voting population that does lean more conservative than I think what is perceived to be the norm for Black voters, period. And we also know that the Trump campaign was very aggressive in targeting Black male and Latino male voters this go around. I mean, President Trump spoke at prison graduations and open outreach centers in Black neighborhoods, and really did enlist and reach out to quite a few, Black celebrities to be surrogates for him, hoping they would connect with some Black male voters who, for various reasons, feel disconnected from the Democratic Party or disenfranchised. And so we should not be surprised by that number just based on what we know about demographics and what we know about history. I think what was most frustrating for many people and maybe surprising is that we have not had a president in recent history who is as vocal in his courting and flirting with white supremacy as Donald Trump. And so I think people were thinking that to get behind this particular president and to be vocal about it, as we saw, Lil Wayne doing, and even briefly 50 Cent, was shocking and disappointing to a lot of people who felt like this president, in particular, more so than perhaps presidents in the past, did not have an agenda that included Black America in his vision of a great America. But I think that the shock that nearly 1 in 5 Black men backed Donald Trump was not rooted in what polling up until the election suggested. Throughout Trump's first campaign, his approval rating with Black people was always about 10%, always around 10%, according to Gallup polling. And so if you take that and you target an audience with misinformation, with disinformation, and you target particular groups that perhaps are not, don't have a history of voting and engaging politics, and aren't, for whatever reason, engaging some of the mainstream media sources that have repeatedly reported on the problems of the Trump administration, you have a group of people who are more likely to back Trump for various reasons, be it that they're susceptible to misinformation, or they're actually just more conservative and more sensitive to an argument that I think this is problematic, but that the Democratic Party has prioritized other marginalized groups more than Black men. I mean, there were surrogates coming from the Trump campaign that just really preyed on those fears. And I think it really does put the Democratic Party in a position moving forward to ask themselves what can be done to stop that hemorrhaging.
I mean, that's an important point, and I want to sort of pivot from that and just open it up to Brother Elvin, Brother Bullock, and Mayor Messam. We've heard all this, we often hear, should we be so aligned with the Democratic Party? Should we, is it right or fair or important for us to be able to work both sides? But I also think about this point, and I think, Brother Scott, you and I sort of did a little back and forth on social media around this issue of allyship. If we're going to fight white supremacy, let's talk about allyship. Can we do it alone? Should we do it alone? What about our allies? Because I also noticed over time, if you look back towards the end of the summer, I think, as you started to see Black Lives Matter protests continue, support among white voters for it started to decline. So you started to see this law and order message from the president. You started to see that get ramped up, and there's a reason for that. And you could also see the impact of that. So let's think. So I'd love to hear what brothers think about, fighting white supremacy, allyship, and how we should position ourselves, or thoughts about how we can position ourselves politically and economically for the future. Anybody that can.
Well, I mean, I'll just say a couple things. I mean, you mentioned, allyship, and then also you mentioned, should we be able to go across the aisle, if you will. And just to make a point, there were very principled Republicans in the past who are fiscally and socially conservative. You can look at your Ed Brooks of the world, and you can look at others in terms of how the party has shifted. So part of the challenge for the Republican Party is really how its party has shifted so far to the right. And also not even just that, but even thinking about evangelicals and others who have been, critical parts of their base that have seemingly lost their way. And so, in many ways, Black people have been the conscience of this country, but I'd argue that white America, and particularly the Republican Party, has to find their conscience again in order to be credible allies and credible messengers. And at the same time, we can't allow folks to be used as tokens as well. And you think about, some of our entertainers who may not be as politically sound, right, and knowledgeable. And so when you start looking at folks and they see things are shining, they hear a platinum plan, that they may gravitate toward that, but not understanding the substance and not speaking to that. And so it's important for us as alphas and as leaders in our respective fields to make sure that we're having these conversations around what are the real stakes involved, right? And then who are the people that you can actually work with? And so looking at some of these policies, what's actionable? Who are the people who are at the table at the state, the local, and the federal level? And sometimes there are people who may be in another party. Again, you look at your John McCain's of the world who've passed away, who again, they have a principled stand. You might not agree with them all the time, but at the same time, you recognize they're coming from a sincere place. Clearly, there's been something lost with the party and with white America. And again, if you look at, you mentioned even some of the responses to surveys. Think about even the surveys as it related to King's popularity prior to his assassination, right? And so it takes some time for people to catch up to where we are, but we have to keep pushing that conversation.
Thanks. And Brother Messam, I want to ask you to respond to the original question. I also want to add that as we think about the browning of America, because I think that's what Brother Scott and I were sort of addressing that time, as you look at the browning of America, is it natural to expect that all of our brothers, including our brown brothers, would be allies in this fight? Because I think some of the concern was that you had a lot of members of the Latino community consider, still supporting Trump, particularly in Florida. Maybe in some places they've long since been allies. How do we think about allyship even with the browning of America?
Well, I think in Florida, what we have to be careful about, just in general, we can't, everyone is not, one size doesn't fit all, so to speak. In Florida, what came out of Florida was the response to the Cuban vote towards Trump. But Puerto Ricans, other Hispanics and Latinos from other diasporas did not support Trump. It was just a microscope was given into Miami-Dade County. But what I would add to this discussion is that what we have to realize as Black people, and especially as a fraternity, that we must know our value. We must know our power. I said in my opening response was that President-elect Joe Biden owes this election to Black people. We really have the ability, when we galvanize as a bloc, our voting power across the country, not just at the presidential level, at the senatorial level, at the congressional level, but even down in our local communities. And what we have to be strategic. When you look at the Jewish community could give a damn if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat. If you are pro-Jewish, we will support your issue. They are issue-based. So we have to be strategic in identifying what are those important issues for our community. You're either with us or you're not with us on these issues, and we cannot be afraid to put our money behind those who will support our issues, to put our support and our votes behind those that, who support our issues. We have to get outside of this box that is always a Democrat candidate that I should support. And look, I bleed blue. Hell, I ran for the highest office and tried to seek the Democratic nomination as a Democrat. But I'm just talking amongst brothers in terms of how we need to be strategic as a community. There are just some issues where if the Democratic Party never fears losing the Black vote, then why would they ever bend over for the Black vote in the Black community? And if you really think about, look at your local leadership, your county Democratic Party, your state Democratic Party, and look at the leadership. If that leadership does not look like you or I, they're taking you for granted because they don't have you and us represented at the highest level of the party. So those are some things that we have to think about as a fraternity. How are we going to be strategic? If the Democratic Party, which we know, for the most part, address and prioritize a lot of issues that address the Black community, then we as a fraternity have to be strategic in terms of how do we control the Democratic Party? How do we get into leadership in the Democratic Party? Because if you go to your local Democrat meeting, or caucus meeting, or club meeting, it's not a lot of brothers and sisters that are in those meetings. It's a lot of white liberals that are running those club meetings and caucus meetings. They're the committee folks. They are the precinct chairs. So I just encourage brothers to educate yourself. If you want to be on the partisan side, understand the party, get involved with the party, identify issues that your chapter can get behind and support those candidates that push those issues. And hell, if a race comes down to it where it says that, okay, well, if you support these alpha issues in our community, we support you, and have your highest priorities that are in place. And when these candidates come to speak to the chapter, come to speak to any other organizations you may be involved with, ask them where they stand on these issues. If you want our support, we need you to commit and pledge that you have a policy around these issues. If we're not speaking that type of language, then we can't expect that the Democratic Party, or any party for that matter, to stand up for our issues.
Thank you, brother. Brother Elvin, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just want to acknowledge that a couple of brothers wrote in the chat that it's important to decluster the Latino community, right? That there's Mexican, there's Venezuelan, there's Cuban, there's Puerto Rican. So they're not monolithic. As we always say, the Black community is not monolithic, right? And so I just wanted to acknowledge that was said, and I think that's what you were referring to as well. But I saw, Brother Elvin, that you were nodding in agreement as the mayor was speaking. And I just wanted to say, and I remember engaging some members of the Jewish community after President Trump moved the embassy, right? And that it's interesting because they were really happy and enthused that the president took this step. But interestingly enough, anti-Semitism has gone up during his presidency as well, right? There's this duality to his presidency in terms of that community and the issues that they care about. He supported them on one, but at the same time, they're undergoing this increase in violence to their community. So it's an interesting point in terms of being focused on issues and not just party. But you were nodding throughout, brother, the mayor's remarks. So I just wanted you to respond to that, please.
Yeah, I was nodding because I think he hit the nail right on the head. As I ran for school board here in Oak Park, there is a heavy Orthodox Jewish population here. And I ran on a ticket with an Orthodox Jewish gentleman. Now, he did not make it. There were 2 seats up and I got the one of them. And he did not make it. But when you looked at you broke down the vote and you kind of see where your votes came from, I looked at the precincts and you could tell he got a lot of votes from his area. And so luckily for me, there were a lot of precincts that were mostly Black. But in this particular case, we ran on a slate and there was a distinct difference between how many votes I got from that area and how many votes he got from that area. And so I was nodding in agreement because they stick together, period, full stop, as a brother of my chapter would say, full stop. And so I do think that we have to do a better job of making sure that our issues, as was stated earlier, are addressed by those who are running for office, particularly those who are looking like us. And I noted earlier that you mentioned the Lil Waynes of the world and things of that nature, because you shine a little something bright in front of him and, oh, you can save this much money on taxes if I win and things of that nature. It's always been my belief that, while I might save something if you win as a Republican, many of my Black brothers and sisters will not. And because of that, I'm willing to forego a little something for the greater good of the Black community. I think that's where some of our, hip hop artists and misguided as they are, need to make sure that they understand it's not just about them.
Let me stay with you for a second, Brother Elvin, because I do want to talk about running for office and why, and I would love for you to talk to the Brotherhood about that. School board, you ran for school board, talk about the importance of local elections, why we need to pay attention to down ballot races. What policies will you have an impact on as a school board member? And again, referring to local politics, why that's critical.
I think it's important that, voters and brothers and, everyone look at the races from state rep on down, because that's what's going to impact your local community the most. I noticed while I was out canvassing and giving my little information to people as they were headed to the polls, there are a number of people who just turned it down. They didn't want to know anything about that race, didn't even care. And they look like me. And so the important thing is that, this is what's going to, but then when something happens and the school board makes a decision and you don't like it, you be the first one complaining and hooting and hollering about they don't care about the kids and yada, yada, yada. But you didn't care about that race either when it was your time to vote. So it's important because those are the things that directly affect what's going on in our lives. Local ordinances, that's the city council level. It's important to look at that, important to think about those races. What happens, how the money is used. I know it's allocated at the state level, but how it's used at the local level where it's not already spoken for, that's the school board's decision. The school board has one employee, the superintendent. What decisions that person makes that you don't like, you need to address that with the school board. So it's certainly important that people pay attention to these down ballot races because they're right there in the community. They're the ones that's making the differences right there in the community, serving right there in the community where you live, where you work, where you play, where you go to church. So, I mean, those are the things that people really need to make sure that they're focused on. I know, it's good that, obviously they want to focus on the presidential race. That's important too. Don't get me wrong, particularly this year in such a polarizing environment. But it's also important to consider what's going on in your own community. And if you don't have line of sight on that, then certainly I think you really need to do your homework and start paying attention.
All right, and Brother Mayor, tell me, you are a mayor of a city. How important are local elections, and why do we not focus as much attention on them as we probably should?
Well, local politics is the closest to the people. When you're a mayor or if you're on your local council or your city commission, when folks wake up, the first thing they do, they go to the restroom, they wash their face, brush their teeth, flush the toilet. Look, your local municipality or county government, is over that utility. The city of Miramar, we just had the worst storm through tropical storm Ada that dumped 16 inches of rain on our city in 4 hours, and streets are flooding like mad. Guess what? Our public works and our utilities company is the ones that are out there responding to that. And that's why it's so important. And I think this is where Alpha has a great opportunity. Alpha Phi Alpha and communities across the country are trusted. We are our lawyers, our educators, our preachers, all the, our coaches in our communities. So our chapters need to have candidate forums, ballot issue forums to educate the community, let them know what their options are in advance. So when folks go to the polls, they're not just looking at the presidential race or the senatorial race or the gubernatorial race because that's all they see on TV, but because the brothers took the time to educate the electorate to say, here are some ballot issues in the county and the community that are important, and here is how it's going to impact your household, or here is it going to impact your property taxes. So make a wise decision. So now they go into the ballot box, they go to the ballot or to the voting booth, or precinct, educated and are actually looking for those ballot issues to vote on. And people don't vote on those down ballot issues is because they're ignorant towards who the candidate is and are uninformed about what the ballot questions may be.
Now, thank you, brother. Before I go any further, we have a little bit of time left. So I just want to make sure that if any brother has any questions, please put it in the Q&A. I'll do my best to get to them before we leave today. Brother Bullock, I want to come to you. You teach young people. Are they coming to your class really understanding what it means to be civically engaged? I mean, you just got a really young brother elected mayor of Baltimore, if I saw that correctly. So there are certainly examples around of young people who are doing the thing. But do you feel that students are coming, with an understanding of what it is to be engaged and mobilized? And how do we, particularly brothers who are in academia, what's your advice to make sure that we are instructing them appropriately and giving them good opportunities to understand, the importance of down ballot races and being civically engaged?
So it's a great question. I would say it's a mixed bag. I mean, some students come in and they're very attuned, and then some are on the opposite side of it. I would say this past week, after the election day, we had some really good conversations in class, and I was taken back by the fact that some students had stayed up all night, and some were really engaged in social media, and that they were really energized about this campaign. So it made me feel really good because as I shared with them that they're the future of this country, they're the future council people and mayors and governors, senators, and all that, but also the activists and those who are pushing the needle. I do want to make one point in terms of some of our local races. And yes, we have several new members of the council, new council president, new mayor, and again, a lot of millennials. But one of the things that's also interesting, this relates to social media and down ballot races, is this. Those races are also connected to the national politics and also money. So here's an example. So here in Baltimore, a lot of people were familiar with a particular candidate running in the 7th Congressional District. She doesn't live in the district, but because she was trying to show a black eye toward Baltimore, she got the attention of Trump, who then was able to facilitate a windfall of money. She raised $7 million in a campaign we knew was going to be a losing campaign. Wow. Wow. So you think about that, that's not a presidential campaign, but you look at the fact that influenced a congressional election. You look at some of the messaging around that. So we have to be very careful. But again, I say this is someone, down ballot who's there this year and in years to come. It's something that we have to make sure our young people are engaged in. So I will tell you this. I have a former student of mine who's on my staff, right? And so he was someone who had been involved in the Young Dems. So we think about the pipelines of leadership. So what are we doing in terms of our political clubs on campus? What are we doing in terms of building a pipeline of young people? And you think about who we have on our staff. Who are we then training to be the next generation? And having those honest conversations with them about what is your role now and what can you do to not only show up, but bring your other friends and your fraternity brothers and sorors to the polls and make sure they show up and volunteer. And I was very pleased to see some of those young people who were actually counting the votes. We forget that those were volunteers who were staying up all night counting those votes. And while people were saying, hey, they're moving slowly, those are those critical jobs. Even our party central committees, all those are on ramps for our young people to be leaders. So in the classroom, I'm pleased, but we can keep pushing it. And I keep having those conversations with our young people to make sure they stay engaged. And I tell them, who I am is public, my party affiliation. However, regardless of your party, I want you to be engaged, knowledgeable, and paying attention to what's going on around you.
Thank you, brother. One of the first jobs I ever had in my political life was being a poll watcher. The first thing I ever did, before cell phones, I had to run to the payphone to update the office every hour on what the vote turnout was with my quarters in hand. So thank you for that. Brother Scott, I want to come to you. There are two questions I have to ask you, actually, but I'll just do one at a time. The first is, we've seen the rise of QAnon, right? And I think there's somebody that's now elected. Is it from the state of Florida?
Georgia.
Georgia. I'm sorry, brother. I didn't mean to put Florida in a mix like that, but Georgia. But we've seen also, and they're not the Tea Party, but we've seen the Tea Party, and we've seen other organizations that have come and run for office and gotten elected. You talked about identity politics at the very beginning. Black folks are always accused of talking about and engaging in and practicing in identity politics, but white communities do that too, don't they? And what's happening in terms of those movements, QAnon in particular? Is this a time when we need to pay more attention to a lot of these fringe groups being elected to office and complicating, or I guess, how does that complicate? How does that frustrate our agenda for Black folks going forward?
Yeah, it's really important to realize that all politics is identity politics. The reality is the different identity groups in which you belong to shape your political worldview very often, and definitely impact and determine how policy impacts you. And the reality is that President Trump and lower level candidates are aware of that, which is why they very often play to the identities of the groups that support the Republican parties most. We know that Trump won white voters. We know he won rural voters. We know he won men. These are all groups who believe that his politics affect their identity groups most or best. And I think what would be valuable for the Democratic Party is if they were hoping to win more support with these groups, particularly white working class voters, is to figure out what issues are most concern to this demographic that are also of concern to the base of the Democratic Party. And there's significant overlap. And one of the reasons why we know that President-elect Joe Biden performed so well in Georgia is because in some of the final days, or should I say weeks of the campaign, when he had surrogates like former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama going to Atlanta, Joe Biden went to like Warm Springs, Georgia. He went to these spaces that we know Democratic presidential candidates don't normally visit because he knew that those were votes worth connecting with, because these are people that President Trump believes that he was able to reach and turn out and get support from. And so that's how parties can approach things differently. In terms of how Black America can approach things differently, it's almost annual frustration from working class people of color and Black people in general, that white working class voters often vote against their self-interest, and would very well be served to listen to the concerns that Black people and working class people of color are advocating for, because these are things that they too would benefit. But very often they back candidates like QAnon, candidates that are supported by QAnon, should I say, because of perhaps the strong relationship between white working class voters, white evangelicals, and the Republican Party. And there's just some overlap with all of those groups. But I think what will be interesting moving forward is larger conversations about allyship and forming a coalition that could benefit more than the demographic or identity groups in which different groups belong to. And I think President-elect Joe Biden was able to figure out a way to do that. I think a lot of attention was focused on whether or not he would just be able to pull together the Obama coalition. But I think when it's all said and done, especially when we see what happens with Arizona, we will see that he was able to develop and form a new coalition of his own with room to grow. And that would be with some of the voters who are more likely to be sympathetic to candidates affiliated with QAnon.
Oh, thank you for that. And actually, then let me go into the second question, because you mentioned polling earlier, but we know that, the president has famously or infamously attacked the media. How do we just talk a little bit about your profession going forward? Like, what's the hit that your profession took during this election? Because certainly how the media reports things as a way of obviously influences the voter, right? So talk about what impact this presidency, that presidency had on the media. What lessons were learned, and how will your job change going forward? What should we be paying more attention?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that like the media is the enemy of the people is very troublesome and very problematic, but it also plays into real insecurities and issues of trust that many Americans do have with the media, some of them valid. One of the things that's so frustrating about criticism of the media is seeing when it comes from so many different places. Some of it's valid, some of it's political oriented, and you have to figure out what is really deserving of attention and what you need to address. One thing that I think that just wasn't true or factual is just the president constantly talking about how the media lies on him and misrepresents his ideas and his words, and that's just not true. You can literally look up very much quotes of his and on videos, and this is literally one of the most leaky White Houses. I mean, people just initiate conversations with the journalists to tell on the president for various reasons, which would take you down another path. But I do think one thing that I don't think this originates with the president, so I don't want to give him credit for that, but there has been a lot of criticism about the gap between who makes up the mainstream media and the electorate. As we know, and I say we as you and I know, the mainstream media is nowhere near as ethnically diverse as it needs to be to cover the population, to cover this increasingly diversifying country. And there's, especially when you get to certain types of media outlets, the socioeconomic diversity, at least background wise, of the media, is just lacking. I mean, one of the reasons why the media did such a poor job of covering the rise of Trump is because very few people in elite outlets know white working class people or even came from that background. I mean, the reality is when you go to some of these organizations, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times included, like certain schools are very, very well represented and other schools are, the lack of schooling period is just as not. And that directly shapes how you understand the world in which you cover. And I think what we may have seen this summer with all of the reckoning in terms of where America is on race is a desire to have more people in positions to tell the stories of this country who come from the communities in which we're reporting on. I don't think Trump originated that idea, but I do think he definitely did speak to the fact that for the most part, the media could do a better job of looking like the people they cover.
Those are fascinating points, and I want to ask Brother Elvin, like, how do you talk to young people about this? How do you talk to young people and teach young people how to engage the media, right? Like how to sift through information and develop sort of a knowledge base. And then also, as we're getting close to time, what are some of the things that you want us to pay attention to going forward? What the work that you're doing, or the work that's left to be done, whether it's in Detroit, Michigan broadly, or even among young people?
So to be quite honest with you, it's important to engage our young folks, as you noted, as it relates to the media. I spent, as a matter of fact, before I became an attorney, I spent 8 years as a part of the media, writing for a newspaper here in Michigan, the Oakland Press in Oakland County. So I get it, and I've spent time even then as a news reporter, spending time going to classrooms, speaking to kids in churches, things of that nature. They need to understand that I'm just like them, but not a lot of me are in that room. And we talked, and you heard the brother talk about that already. We're not, the media is not representative a lot of the times of the community it serves. So those of us who are in those rooms need to make sure we're getting back and speaking with those children to say, look, we're not the enemy. But in case you think that we're not giving you the right information, do your homework. Do your homework. And that's what I encourage mine to do. That's what I encourage other kids that I speak with to do. You have something I didn't have. I had Encyclopedia Britannica in Compton. I don't know. I know I'm dating myself, but you've got Google. We didn't have that. So I mean, you've got LexisNexis. We didn't have that. So use those items to your advantage and go do your own homework. And you hear our current president, talk about lying from the media and fake news and things of that nature. But to be honest with you, I've never seen so much fact checking go on from what a politician was saying, and almost all of it was got a rating of pants on fire, with additional information to say what the real truth is. So, I mean, do your homework. Don't just listen to our politicians, because both sides, I don't care what side you're on, Democrat, Republican, and everything in between, no one tells the truth 100% of the time, or they distort the numbers to make it sound like, they wanted to. So it's important for all kids, that's what I tell them, to do your own homework, to seek your own truth. And, I often say, I don't trust anybody. So it doesn't matter. I'm a trained skeptic. My mother tells me the sky is blue, I got to look outside just to make sure. That's kind of a joke, but the truth of the matter is, you got to do your own homework. And I heard us talk a little bit earlier, and I think it was an apropos quote from Lyndon B. Johnson, in which he noted, if you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. He'll give you somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you. And that's as apropos today as it was in the 60s. I know it's off topic, but I needed to go back there because I heard that conversation, kind of that we were getting up to that point a little bit earlier, and I just wanted to make that point. You know, there many of the uneducated white voters went to Trump, and will vote for someone whose policies adversely affect them all day long. But because they're spewing that rhetoric or some of that hate rhetoric, they'll join them in that, and that's what we've been witnessing. So, but I do encourage kids, and I encourage adults too. Matter of fact, do your own homework, check the facts, see what you can find, because not everything we're seeing that's said through the media. Because let's face it, politicians use the media to make their points. Not everything you read is going to be accurate.
Okay, I'm going to just do a quick lightning round, and thank you for starting that off, Brother Elvin. But Brother Mayor, first of all, I'm supposed to say that my good friend is one of the folks he went to school with, Nadia Garnett, who is a political strategist extraordinaire. So she said to say hello. But brother, what do we need to be paying attention to going forward as we look past this election? How can we help you? And also, what should we be paying attention to as we look past this election the next couple of years, months and years?
Well, first, to stay in contact with me, you can follow me on social media at Wayne Messam on Instagram and Twitter. And what I'm doing is locally here is I've really taken on the entire racial equity momentum that this nation has seemed to catch fire on. And I encourage all the brothers. I see we have basically about 300 brothers on the call tonight. Many of us are in position of influence. Many of us are in position of policy. It may not be in government or in the public sector, but definitely in your organizations and your corporations. We need to do everything that we can to level the playing field when we have an opportunity. Oftentimes, we are the only ones in the boardroom. We are the only ones in the position, and we need to not be afraid to speak truth to power. So I'll start with that. And just a couple of examples, what I'm doing in my city. And by the way, Miramar, Florida, we're right between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. We're the 13th largest city in the state of Florida. Our annual budget is about $300 million. And I'm getting down to the point where we are making equity decisions when it comes down to opportunities like who are we selecting to be our bond counsel, contracting opportunities and professional services. And it really has to get down to that granular level. And unless we are willing to be bold enough to move forward in creating equity in the places where we can be of influence, we need to do so. In terms of elections moving forward, 2024, actually 2022 is going to be our next general election in our states. Many states will be voting on congressional seats, gubernatorial seats, senatorial seats. Start preparing now. If you have not donated to the Alpha PAC or Collective PAC or whatever PAC, brothers, we got to give. We have great candidates out there that need resources to get their message out, and we got to get involved politically. I mentioned earlier about if you're interested in the Democratic Party, start going to meetings, begin to push the envelope, get involved, get active, because a lot of decisions are made and it really determines who are going to be these candidates. When you see a candidate, especially a statewide candidate, oftentimes these candidates are selected by the powers that be of your state party. Don't get it twisted. It's not because they're the best candidate. It's not because they have the best issues. It's that they have been anointed. And sometimes we just have to shake things up because many of us as brothers are more educated, we're more articulate, and we have more grasp of the neighborhood because we are in the neighborhood. And we have a better story that could perhaps catch fire in your county, in your state, and you could very well be that candidate like our good brother Warnock, who's knocking on the door of the U.S. Senate. So I just encourage brothers, you may be comfortable in your community, comfortable in your way of life. Trust me, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner, but yet public service just keeps pulling me because it's just my conscience cannot sit back and not be involved in my community, maybe to a fault to sometimes. So I just encourage brothers, if to stay in touch, at Wayne Messam on social media platforms. And my challenge to all the brothers here is that I'm no different than you. Whether you crossed undergrad, grad chapter, whether you crossed above ground, underground, whatever the case may be, we're all brothers. We're all alphas. We're all holding up the light. And oftentimes we do things that no other person has ever done. And we have never been afraid to going into uncharted territory and running for office. If that's something that's been in the back of your mind, that's the spirit that's calling, and you need the answer to it, get educated, link up. There are a lot of brothers that are involved, the brothers that are on this panel that can give you some suggestions and some advice. And I'll put my contact information in the chat box, and anybody want to reach out to me, feel free to do so. A5.
Thank you, brother. And I'd like to just say, if brothers can share their, social media information, what have you, that would be great. I would also add very quickly, we have a brother who's a vice chair of the DNC, Michael Blake, and my guess is I think next year he's up again, because I think it's after the presidential election that they vote again. So sometime probably in the spring, late winter or early spring, they may have it. I think the DNC has another meeting where they work on that. And I used to be the executive director of the State Democratic Party here in New York. So, brother, I understand what you're saying in terms of how those parties work. I get it. Brother Bullock, just your final thoughts. What should we be paying attention to? What are you working on that we could be helpful to you?
So I'm just going to say again, 2022, because you have to look at these midterm elections. A lot of times, that's where it's very critical. The president's party tends to lose seats during those midterm elections. So that's going to be very critical for folks to turn out. Just to quote, Barack Obama, you have to change the guard, but guard the change. And so that's going to be a very critical election. The other thing that I would also say in terms of being active, many of us brothers, highly educated and very successful, but at the same time, being on the ground, being seen. And so part of it's even our neighborhood associations. I go to a lot of neighborhood meetings. Now I'm doing it more virtually. But again, if you look at our neighborhood associations that are generally women-led, and so, and especially senior women. And so if you look at the voting demographics, again, it leans very heavily toward Black women, especially of a certain age. And so for us to really get engaged in our communities on the ground level, not only in our churches and our neighborhood associations as well. And so making sure that we are then bringing a crop of young people and middle-aged people who can then take the reins of government. So working on everything from affordable housing like we're doing here in Baltimore. I know the mayor talked about equity that has to be at the center of all of what we do in terms of racial equity, economic equity. Even just today in the city council, we talked about, we passed the bills that are related to a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction, dealing with homelessness. Those are critical issues, especially dealing with this health global pandemic. Again, there are a lot of people who are hurting. And so we need to make sure that we are visible, because people don't care how much you know until you know how much you care.
That's right. So brothers, I just want to wrap it up with one last question. And I just ask you to be really brief. Just tell us how Alpha has impacted your life. I'm going to start with you, Brother Elvin. How has this fraternity, how has our brotherhood impacted your life? I know.
So let me I'll try to be as brief as I can. I know we run out of time here. I crossed when I was 29 years old, and I remember being in a room at Gamma Lambda in Detroit, and everyone who was introducing themselves was brother doctor so-and-so, or such and such Esquire. I see a bunch of doctors on here. And it was just like that type of atmosphere that kind of pulled me in. And so, I came to Alpha with one college degree as a news reporter. I mentioned that earlier. And since that time, being around y'all, you educated, erudite, as my brother Harry Todd would say, erudite alphas. I've gone on and gotten 3 more college degrees since that time. And went to law school, and then of course running for office. That type of stuff is from being around you all. That being in the room with alphas make you feel like you can do something special. And so I owe a lot to that. And even when I was running in the midst of a pandemic that we have here, brothers were with me hitting the streets. So and people who weren't us took notice. Like, my God, you got that many people with you. Alphas to the left of me and alphas to the right, and some in front and behind me too. So just in case, you know what I mean? So I would say that alphas had a huge impact on my life. And it is, it's part of the reason why my career and everything has taken off in the trajectory that it has. And just really quick, Brother Ward putting out that challenge to us to do more with, in the voteless people space, has, led us to do more and led me to be more also of what we should be doing in the community. So just want to put that out there, and that's kind of.
Thank you, my brother. Brother Scott, talk to us about how Alpha has impacted your life as well, please.
Yeah, I mean, relationally more than anything, which seems like one of the easiest answers. But this December would be 20 years since I crossed Alpha, Mu Zeta chapter at the University of North Carolina, and General President Dr. Everett Ward was there. He was president of Phi Lambda at that time, the Raleigh grad chapter. But to this day, I'm in group chats with my LBs and chapter brothers, and we stay in communication 20 years later. You remember, you think of House of Alpha and, men unacquainted, enter, shake hands, exchange greetings, and depart friends. And that's been true more than anything else. My closest friends are brothers that I met, through this amazing organization. And for that, I'm grateful.
Thank you, Brother Scott. Brother Bullock, Dr. Bullock.
I'm smiling because I've been in the fraternity now 22 years. I came through Gamma Iota at Hampton University. And when I went to graduate school at North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I got very closely embraced by the brothers of Mu Zeta, and Mu Zeta brother is my son's godfather. So you put all that together, and the district I represent here in Baltimore, our Delta Lambda chapter is right in the heart of our district. So again, brothers have been a great support in terms of getting through college, graduate school, post-grad, but then also what we do in the community. So again, I know some of our brothers from our undergraduate chapter and our grad chapter are on this call. So it's good to be in the House of Alpha, brothers.
Thank you, Doctor. And Brother Mayor, we will end with you, sir.
Oh man, ever since crossing Burning Sands at Alpha Delta chapter at Florida State University, man, Alpha has been everything. Alpha, I think what I would say what Alpha has done for me is challenge me to do great things, because all I heard of were great brothers from my chapter that were the first to do it at Florida State, and our great Alpha men throughout history who were the first to do something, whether it was in business or whether it's in civil rights movement. So because of Alpha, there was no doubt in my mind that Wayne Messam, brother Wayne Messam, could go after whatever he chose to go after or chooses to go after. So it gave me that confidence, so from traversing through Florida State University to becoming the first Black mayor, of my city. It's just, it was never a fear to go and try to do these things, because just because of the values and what was instilled in me through this fraternity and the relationships of brothers through all times. I mean, brothers, my line brothers, brothers who helped made me, brothers who made those brothers, and brothers that I've met along the way, and brothers who I enjoy relationships with in other organizations. So it's just something about Alpha, and just being on this call with with you great brothers and all the brothers that are listening in and putting words in the chats that we're seeing, some great comments out there. I just love being in a room and a virtual forum of Alphas. So brothers, continue to hold the light, and you can always reach out. I put my contact information in the chat, and feel free to reach out whenever you want.
Thank you, Brother Mayor. Brother General President, I will turn it over to you, sir, and hope that the work was to your liking.
Brothers, thank you so much. This has been a most enlightful conversation. What I'm so pleased about is where I see Alpha in the future. We've got to continue this advocacy, brothers, because politics is 365 days of the year. We've got a mayor, we've got a city councilman, a school board member, a journalist, 2 political scientists on this call, and this represents Alpha Phi Alpha in its finest order. I want to thank you for your strategic discussion tonight. I heard so many great things that you said, but what I want us to take away from this conversation is that the state of this nation demands that we stay engaged at every level of the political process, both as elected officials both as advocates for public policy. Each one of you said exactly right. We've got to fight for the public policy issues that we care about. And we've also got to run up and down the ballot from the school board all the way to President of the United States. And I'm looking forward to the day that we will have an alpha in the Oval Office of this nation. But now I must tell you, my biggest concern and my biggest focus, brothers, between now and January 5th, I'm going to use the lyrics that Ray Charles had. Georgia is on my mind. And that is what we're going to focus on as a fraternity. But also, you made a strong point tonight that we've got to talk to not only the Biden transition team, but the governors, the congressmen, the school board members, everyone, state legislators. We've got to advance the alpha agenda at every level between now, because 2022 is upon us. But brothers, our people need us. They need us now more than ever. And that's what Alpha was founded for, and that's what we've got to stay committed to. It's my honor to be your general president, but what we've got to continue to do, my brothers, is continue to be that voice for our people. And when you talk about educating the community on issues, yes, the media has a job to do, but we have a job to do, to have forums and to be in touch with the people in our communities, to make sure that we deconstruct the issues and make sure that the issues we are concerned about are relevant. The Congressional Black Caucus, when it was founded in 1971, said no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent issues. And that is the motto that we've got to move forward as a fraternity. Thank you, my brothers. This has been a great conversation. I've been listening and reading all the chats. We've got brothers from Las Vegas, every part of the country signed on tonight. And so now I'm ready. First thing tonight, we're going to start the Alpha train. We're going to move into Georgia, but we're also going to continue to move throughout this country and indeed the world. Thank you, my brothers. And I know this recording will be posted on our website so brothers can go back and see this and listen to your words of wisdom for many, many hours to come. Thank you, my brothers. It was a great evening. And thank you for being the scholars that you are, but more than anything else, for always being, first of all, servants of all, as we transcend all.
Thank you, Brother General President. And brothers, thank you all for attending this excellent conversation. As you can see, we have done a lot of work, but there's so much more work that's still yet to be done. We had a panel filled with our fraternity's finest, Brother Eugene Scott, Brother Mayor Wayne Messam, Brother Al Elvin, Brother Dr. John Bullock, and it was moderated by our esteemed Brother Dr. Smichael. Brothers, I wouldn't be a good executive director if I didn't remind you that you need to renew your dedication to the fraternity and pay your dues, my brother, before November 15th, the deadline to be active throughout the next year in December 31st, 2021. If you aren't already following us on social media, please do so. We share a lot of information and updates at APA 1906 Network. As the General President mentioned, Brother Dr. Everett B. Ward, we are first of all. We are servants of all, and with your help, my brothers, we will transcend all. 06, my brothers, be safe and have a wonderful evening. Take care.